The New York Post exposes more lewd, corrupt, and gross information left on Hunter Biden's laptop. A Biden nominee to be a United States District Federal Judge cannot answer basic questions about the Constitution. And a federal judge blocks a California law that would punish doctors for not adhering to medical consensus. And as our timeless topic for today, renowned artist Robert Florczak joins us in studio to discuss what are some paintings that we should all know about. I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Today is Wednesday, February 1st, 2023, and here's the news that you have to know today. First, the New York Post has reported more lewd findings on Hunter Biden's laptop that are not surprising given what we know about this class act, but nevertheless are disgusting. And by the way, it's important to note that the FBI has possession right now of this laptop, but the Delaware store owner who had possession of the laptop before he handed it over to the FBI made a copy of the contents of the laptop on a flash drive, and he gave it to the New York Post and to other media outlets, which was really smart of him to do in retrospect. I don't know his name. I don't know if he has been hailed enough as the hero that he is in conservative media, but I would like to say to that man, thank you for doing this, because now we are finding out all of the information that we, the American people, deserve to know about the president's son and the president that the FBI may not have come forward with. So, according to text messages on Hunter's laptop, Hunter threatened in this latest scandal to withhold pay from one of his assistants if she did not FaceTime him for sex. The woman, who at the time was just 29 years old, worked at Hunter Biden's law firm, Owasco, from 2018 to 2019. And she is the fourth employee who we know so far, the number is probably much higher, who has had a sexual relationship with Hunter Biden. She told Hunter in these text messages that she was scraping by for rent, and so he sent her an Apple Pay transfer of about $1,500. And then he said that she could make it up to him by FaceTiming him for sex. You can get more of the specifics about this exchange as well as other exchanges by looking at the New York Post story or just by Googling it. I'm not going to detail them here because I just think that they're too lewd and tawdry. But what we also know from this release of information is that Hunter also took videos of him having sex with one of his other assistants and kept it on his laptop. And we don't know whether this assistant was aware that Hunter was taking this video, if she consented to it, which is obviously quite disturbing. And he also asked this assistant to set up her phone so that Hunter could spy on her in the shower. Classy. I would like to remind you that this is the President of the United States' son. We also know from these emails that Hunter Biden put his sister-in-law, that's his late brother Beau's widow, Haley Biden, on the payroll of his law firm, which raises a lot of questions. And also it should be noted that after Beau Biden died, Hunter Biden had an affair with Haley Biden, his sister-in-law, his brother's widow. Isn't that a little bit creepy and odd to us? And doesn't it raise some question marks that now she's on the payroll of this law firm? Also, Hunter put Haley's sister, Liz Segundi, on the payroll of his law firm, and apparently he also had an affair with this woman. Who didn't Hunter Biden have an affair with? And we also know from these emails that he hired his daughter's former basketball coach to work at the law firm, but then quickly he terminated her employment and stopped responding to her messages when she said that she was pregnant with his child. So these recent stories fit into a much larger theme that we know, not just about Hunter Biden, but about the Biden family, that they seem to engage in some corrupt, inappropriate, lewd sexual activity. About a year ago, it was found out that Ashley Biden wrote in her personal diary that she, growing up, had to take nude showers with her father, our president, Joe Biden. And so what I want to ask you listening is, even if this is all we know about the Biden family, these lewd sexual details, even if we didn't know anything about their foreign business dealings, and by the way, we know a lot about their foreign business dealings, and I'm about to give you some specifics in about a minute, but even if we just knew this information, isn't this enough to say that these are sleazy, corrupt, slimy people? It wouldn't be the case that they would just confine their illicit, inappropriate activity to this realm and not carry it over into other realms and other business dealings. So you're telling me that they're just corrupt in their personal businesses and in their personal relationships, but then when it comes to dealing with actually corrupt people like Ukrainian and Russian oligarchs and Chinese business tycoons, they go about things in a totally straightforward, kosher manner? It doesn't make sense. And as I just said, we do know a lot of specifics that indicate that they are not kosher with their dealings with foreign actors. I'm going to rattle some off to you, and this is stuff that we have known for the past year or 2 years, but we need to be reminded of it because it's very easy to forget these specifics, especially because, unfortunately, the mainstream media doesn't report on this, and they don't even report on these new findings on the laptop. As I mentioned, this story came from the New York Post. I, this morning, did not see anything on CNN or written by the New York Times about this, and it's really egregious to ignore. So here are the specifics about what we know about the Bidens' relationship with foreigners. First, Hunter Biden received about $1 million a year from Burisma, which was a corrupt Ukrainian oil company, while his father was vice president of the United States and in charge of American-Ukrainian relations. And by the way, that $1 million a year number is 10 times more than the average American board member gets in a salary. Number two, the mayor of Moscow's wife sent Hunter Biden's firm a $3.5 million wire transfer. Third, the Penn Biden Center, which is that think tank that none of us knew about until classified documents were discovered there on November 2nd, the Penn Biden Center gave then Vice President Biden a $900,000 annual salary, and we know that China itself was one of the biggest funders to this think tank. Number four, a Chinese businessman gave Hunter Biden a 7-carat diamond ring after they had a meeting at a hotel in the United States. And number five, one of Hunter's business associates representing Hunter and Joe Biden referred to Joe Biden as, quote, the big guy in a series of email exchanges with a Chinese government-linked energy conglomerate. And he said that 10% of the earnings would go to that big guy. And of course, we all know who the big guy is. It is President Joe Biden. So I'd like to end this segment by asking you this question. How do you think the media would be handling this information and reporting on these new laptop findings if it were Donald Trump Jr. or Eric Trump? I imagine it would be quite different. In other Biden-ish news, President Biden has appointed Charnel Bilkengren, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, it's spelled Bjelkengren. Biden has appointed her to be a United States federal district judge for the Eastern District of Washington State. And Ms. Bilkengren is currently a judge at the Spokane County Superior Court in Washington. So during last week's Senate Judiciary Committee hearings, Senator John Kennedy, who's a Republican from Louisiana, questioned her. And of course, in these hearings, we know that they are infamous for senators being tough on the appointees. But Senator Kennedy asked her to identify parts of the Constitution. It's not exactly a hardline question. It's very simple. And she just could not answer it. Let's listen.
Judge on the far end. Tell me what Article 5 of the Constitution does.
Article 5 is not coming to mind at the moment.
Okay. How about Article 2?
Neither is Article 2.
Okay. Do you know what purposivism is?
In my 12 years as an assistant attorney general and my 9 years serving as a judge, I was not faced with that precise question. We are the highest trial court in Washington state, so I'm frequently faced with issues that I'm not familiar with, and I thoroughly review the law, research, and apply the law to the facts presented to me.
Well, you're going to be faced with it if you're confirmed. I can assure you of that.
It was not strategically smart of her to remind Senator Kennedy of her experience, because she just showed the entire world that she cannot answer basic questions about the Constitution when her job is to apply and interpret that document. How can you apply the law if you don't know what the law is? If you are trying to be a United States federal district judge and you don't know the Constitution, that is like being a doctor who doesn't know anatomy. And by the way, the sad thing about that analogy that I just made is that we're actually getting closer to that being the case for doctors. In upcoming weeks, I'm going to be interviewing Heather McDonald, who has recently written several fascinating articles, fascinating but very sad articles, about the way that the medical industry has been corrupted by wokeism. And one of the things that she has talked about at length is how the MCAT has been changed. Now, a quarter of the questions on the MCAT are about social issues. And the MCAT has this policy where questions with the largest racial variance are removed from the test. So again, we are kind of going in that direction, and it is astonishing that we are at the point in this country where someone being nominated for this very important job cannot tell us Article 2 or Article 5 of the Constitution. But it reflects that they think that being a judge isn't about interpreting or applying the law. It's about doing whatever you feel like. It's this living Constitution approach that you can just read whatever you want into the document and make it fit your standards. But if we go by that approach, what's the point of even having a law in the first place, or having someone who's there to interpret and enforce it? Now, there is some good news that there are still some people in this country who do interpret and follow the Constitution as they should, and one of them is from our state here of California. A federal district judge in the Eastern District of California has blocked a California law this week that would have punished doctors who did not adhere to medical consensus. As background, last year, the Democrats in California passed legislation which Governor Gavin Newsom signed into law, allowing the state medical board to discipline and revoke the licenses of doctors who, quote, disseminate misinformation or disinformation, who, quote, contradict the contemporary scientific consensus, or who do things that are, quote, contrary to the standard of care. This is unbelievably dystopian. But luckily, a group of doctors filed a complaint in federal court. And you can file a complaint in any federal court, but because this is a California statute, they decided to do it in California. They alleged a constitutional violation, and they asked this judge to grant an injunction. And an injunction is an order that temporarily prevents the law from going into effect. So this judge, William Shub, granted it. And as I just indicated, an injunction is not the end of things. It is just granted pending other litigation. So the doctors essentially said to him, we will challenge this law in court, but while we are going through the process of challenging it, please stay it in the meantime. Please prevent it from going into law. So ultimately, this lawsuit will go to trial, and hopefully it will go to the Supreme Court. So Judge William Shub, in his order, said that the law's definition of misinformation and contemporary scientific consensus was unconstitutional and incredibly vague under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. He wrote in his very articulate and sensible opinion, quote, who determines whether a consensus exists to begin with? If a consensus does not exist, Among whom must the consensus exist? For example, practicing physicians or professional organizations or medical researchers or public health officials, perhaps a combination. He also wrote, COVID is a disease, and this is so important, COVID is a disease that scientists have only been studying for a few years and about which a scientific consensus has been hotly contested. It is a quickly evolving area of science that in many aspects eludes consensus. And finally, he writes, certain conclusions once considered to be within the scientific consensus about COVID were later proved to be false. Now, he is focusing specifically on the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. To be honest, I haven't read in full his opinion. I imagine he does bring up the free speech argument, but it seems to me that that is the bigger problem here, that the government is blatantly violating the First Amendment by trying to censor the speech of doctors. Now, I'd like to remind you that the language of the First Amendment says that the government shall not make a law that inhibits the free expression of speech. This is exactly what the California statute was trying to do. And we see that it fits into a larger theme, very sadly, in this country, where we see many government organizations trying to suppress the speech of American citizens. The FBI certainly was trying to do that through its collusion with Twitter, which has come out recently, thanks to Elon Musk's exposure of the Twitter files. There's even a case to be made that public school administrators and teachers violate the First Amendment by suppressing conservative viewpoints and content in the classroom. So as I said, I hope that this case goes all the way to the Supreme Court as well as other government suppressions of free speech, because it is starting to become a big problem and it is only going to grow. Doing a total 180 from politics, I have a professional artist with me here on the set, Robert Florczak. Hello, Robert.
Hello there, Julie.
I have an introduction written for you, and the great thing about you sitting across from me is that if I get something wrong, you can cut in and correct me, or you can add. Robert, as I just said, is a professional artist. He has a specialty and interest in classical methods, and we're going to be getting into what that means, what the definition of classical is. He's earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Cooper Union in New York City. His original works are in the private collection of Mel Gibson, Michael Jackson, Whoopi Goldberg, Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen, and also in the corporate collections of AT&T and Random House Publishing. He's also the author of a book about Errol Flynn. It's called Errol Flynn, The Illustrated Life Chronology, and I've been using it to write notes, but here is the book. Now, I told Robert off the air, I had no idea who Errol Flynn was. Some of you listening are probably have your head in your hand thinking, how could I not know? But boy, is he handsome. We've got to get into why you wrote this book about him. And you, I should say Robert, is also a PragerU presenter. About 8 years ago, he did a video called Why is Modern Art So Bad? And recently he came out with a video called Why is Classical Art So Good? Did I get that introduction right?
You got it right.
Well, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. This is great.
It's a great honor to interview you. So I want to start off just to give the audience an impression of how talented you are as an artist, excuse me. Let's pull up some photos of your paintings. Can we do that now, Sean?
My paintings, wow.
I stalked your website.
I didn't know this.
Because I do my homework.
Is that what we're looking at? That's a Thomas Cole.
That's a Thomas Cole.
It's about 200 years too early. Right.
That's a Thomas Cole, but you know, your paintings.
Or should we look at it this way?
That's you.
Ah, yes.
What's this one called?
This is David and Goliath, and
Right.
that was an interesting thing because it was commissioned by Caesar's Palace
Really?
for an article about boxing. There were huge heavyweight boxing championship fights there, so they wanted the article was about the David and Goliath situations of some matches, I think, and so I put David and Goliath in the ring. And the two, what's interesting in my work very often is the models that I use. I always use models, and very often they're friends. And at the time, these were two neighbors of mine. And this guy really was about 6'7", a real sweetheart.
Wow. So when you say you use models, do you have them just stand there for hours on end while you paint?
No. What I will do is I will photograph them in costume and with props in exactly the position I would want, it lit the way I would want, as if I am having them stand there for hours. But we don't have to have that anymore, because we can do photography with that. I never liked, and I almost never would paint from photos per se, because snapshots are a different thing. But if you set up a model in a photo session and you're looking at the photographic representation of that, it's as if you're standing in front of them painting and they're posing for you all day long. But always real live models, always costumed, and with the props and everything. And sometimes in locations that one was not any real location, but the locations are often part of it.
You said that often they're friends. Is that something that is your choice? Like you prefer to have models that are friends because maybe the energy and between them is palpable and it can be reflected in their stances, or is it just sort of coincidence?
It's just that I know their look and their personalities.
Yeah.
So it can work. Secondly, if you're hiring, you're paying. So, although I would never be paying that, the client would pay for it, but
Right.
I wouldn't need to. And also knowing a model, it's more convenient because you can be easy with them and they can work with you in time schedules and stuff like that. In this particular piece, this was my daughter's ballet teacher.
Oh.
And
What's this one called?
this is called Distant Thoughts, and it's part of a series I did for a Japanese limited edition litho series that people would buy lithographs of the piece. And it was called Romance in Paradise, the series. Totally fantasy oriented. You sort of had a vague idea of when it was, and through the costumes where it would be taking place, but not quite. I wanted it to be almost like in a parallel universe of some time period without identifying it exactly, so that people could sort of read into it themselves. That was a professional model, though. So I ended up finding, I can't remember how I found him, and the same couple is in each of the 8 pieces of the Romance in Paradise series. And I chose costuming that, again, was sort of vaguely from a Greco-Roman period, but not necessarily.
Just so the audience knows, we're going to be analyzing 5 paintings that Robert thinks everyone should know about. But while we're getting to know you and analyzing your paintings, I want to ask you, how long does it take to do one of these?
A long time, because of a stubbornness in utilizing a method and technique that goes back to the Renaissance that nobody was using. It's gotten to the point now where there's a lot of digital work done because it's so fast and clean.
What do you mean digital work for paintings?
Illustrators will make art digitally. They'll never touch a brush or paint. It's all done on a screen. And
Oh, you're talking about other artists.
yes,
not you. Okay,
other
got
artists
it.
and illustrators. And I could never do that. I love the old methods because I always cared about the original piece itself after the job was done. I painted in a way all the time for 2 purposes: for the project, but also keeping in mind what kind of value and interest it would have for people after the fact, hanging on a wall when you don't even know what the project was. Can it be appealing that way too? And most illustrators didn't care about that. They would do the job and then that's it, and not really interested in it as a work of art after the fact. And if the project was so specific about a product or something like that, often the illustration has almost no interest outside of that, if that makes sense.
How do you sustain your creativity? Do you find that you rely on music or on exercise or on discussions with people? What's your way of keeping that going?
I have no idea. It's just there. It's like Dennis Prager often says, for some of his abilities, he's just lucky. You're just either born that way or you're not. I never even think twice. As a matter of fact, in some ways it can be a curse because I always feel I don't have enough time. I did it, if this is at all interesting to you, I hope it is. About 3 or 4 years ago, I made a bucket list, in a sense, of all the backlogged projects that I have, that I will be getting to one after another. The Errol Flynn book was one of them, and I finally got that out of the way. It took 10 years of intermittent work to get it done, but it got done. And then the next thing is on the drawing board, so to speak. Well, I did this list of just the things, just the projects that I already have, knowing how long they probably will take me to do. And I did the math, and it came out to I would be 106.
Wow.
And that was terrifying.
Well, we've got to have you live till then.
Put in a good word for me, would you?
I understand what you're saying, though. I feel that a lot, too, that I just don't have enough time to accomplish everything I want. But it's a blessing as well as a curse.
It is. It goes both ways.
It's the curse of the capable, I call it.
Right, right.
So what's this?
That's one of my favorite models who's been in, probably he and a good friend of mine have been in more paintings of mine than anyone. That's my baby brother.
Oh.
Not so much baby brother. He became known as the chef to the stars. He was a private chef.
Wow, you're a creative, talented family.
Well, again, I mean, we may be lucky, but boy, am I proud of him. He's about 9 years younger, and came to New York. Came to Los Angeles to stay with Big Brother and find his way in L.A. And he became an in-demand private chef to the biggest stars. Like he was with Tom Cruise for 6 years, and it's very sad that Lisa Marie Presley was in the news recently, and her mother. They had him come to audition chefing for them because they'd heard so much about him, and he did a big dinner for them, and they loved it, and they wanted to hire him. But he ended up having another offer from someone else that he took instead. But anyway, so that's my brother posing for me as a farmer during harvest time, and it was for some computer company. It was an ad in a magazine or whatever. But again, this is an example where I served the purposes of the project. So in the context of the magazine article or ad or whatever, it makes sense. But not having that context, it still can stand on its own as a sort of something to hang on the wall, so to speak.
It's interesting because when I ask you about these different pieces, and it makes sense, you immediately talk about the model because it's your friend.
Well, in that situation, it was just by coincidence, those two. For instance, obviously there's a model for this, but yeah, Neverland Valley. This was an interesting thing because Michael Jackson was a fan of my work. He was really into illustrators, and he would get the big illustration catalogs every year that would come out that advertise illustrators' work. And I had already done a portrait of him that was given to him as a gift that he had hanging in his house. And he contacted me through his intermediary that he wanted a painting done to be used as his stationery, his personal stationery. That's why there's all this space in the middle.
Oh, wow.
He wanted this little fantasy land at the bottom, and this little boy sitting in the moon looking down over it, and Neverland Valley is the name of this whole thing, with a lot of sky space in between for him to write his letters. Well, he loved the boy in the moon image so much that it ended up being used as the logo for everything to do with Neverland Valley.
Your illustration?
Yes, and it was on the gate as you would come in. From the sky, you could see a big circular version of it at the train station in the place, on the trash cans around them, on soap. Every little item that they would give away as gifts and everything would have that thing on.
How old were you when, if you don't mind me asking?
38.
Did you just feel like you made it? I mean, to have someone like Michael Jackson take your illustration and use it as what, I mean, especially something as famous as Neverland Valley, my God.
I guess. I'll tell you something. It's a little sad. Afterwards, he wanted me to do yet another painting. He wanted a huge painting for the lobby of his home there at Neverland Valley, and he gave me this concept. He wanted infants of all races that would be hanging in little sort of like diaper things from the branches of a giant tree, like, you know, a world tree of, you know, of babies from everywhere. So I said yes, and I started the process where I hired babies, so to speak. People would bring their babies into the photo studio that I would use, and I would be shooting photos of all these babies that I would use for the project. And as I started then designing it in pencil or whatever, I'm looking at this piece, and it just seemed like insect locusts, locust insect pods hanging from branches, and it was really kind of creepy.
Yeah.
And I was getting so many other project offers at the time. It was one of the few times I finally turned around and said, you know, I'm going to pass on this after all.
Are you glad you did?
Yeah, because I wouldn't, that piece would have gotten known too. And people, when they see your work, they don't realize what went behind having it commissioned. So you're the one who's going to take the flack. And I would be the one who painted this strange tree with all these babies hanging from it, and
Right.
it just looked weird.
Have you taken flack for the scandal surrounding Neverland Valley? I mean, I don't know why you would. It's
Well,
You painted the logo.
no, but if I had, and I didn't know anything about that at the time, of course. But had I done that, and looking back, in retrospect, had I done that painting and it became known, there may have been a little connection there, and I'm glad that I didn't.
Wow. So
Yeah.
I was very impressed, and I'm not just saying that to
thank you.
flatter you. I really was blown away by your work. And so, as I mentioned in my clunky introduction, you have a specialty in classical methods. So can you explain for us what that means? And I'll tell you my preliminary understanding, and you can edit it. My understanding, when you say classical, you mean more traditional or representational of reality as we all see
No,
it.
that's different.
Oh, okay.
That's
How-
simply
okay.
the subject matter.
How is it different?
Well, when I talk about classical technique, it's simply the technique, the manner in which you actually create the work itself, regardless of what the subject is. I mean, I used the classical technique on this piece, but I could have used the same technique on a painting of a gas station on the corner. So it doesn't matter.
Do you mean, when you say classical, you know, when I just said traditional, does it also mean Greek and Roman?
No,
Or
again,
just more broadly
again,
traditional?
that would be the style.
Right.
Style's a different thing. This is the nuts and bolts of paint and brushes and that kind of stuff. That's what I mean about the method, the classical method. There was a way of painting that developed in the Renaissance, late Renaissance, that was used for many almost centuries. That's long been discarded. Ever since, for instance, the Impressionists, they threw out that kind of thing because it was too time-consuming. And the Impressionists, by their name, for instance, and their very name, which they didn't give to themselves, but it meant painting an impression on the spot.
Right.
The Impressionists were outdoors, painting as quickly as they could the impression of what they were seeing in front of them, not only the subject, but the particular light of day and all that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The technique I'm talking about is very time-consuming, and it takes many days and weeks to finish a certain type of piece. But the results in real life, not necessarily in printed, you wouldn't be able to see it, but the real piece itself, when you see it in real life, has a look to it that is incomparable from any other kind of method that's used to paint. Okay. And I loved that, and learned how to do that early on. And for better or worse, I mean, it took me, twice as long as the average illustrator to do projects, and I did a lot of overnighters, 24 hours. As a matter of fact, the Michael Jackson piece that you just saw, or maybe it was the portrait of him that I think that's what it was, the portrait I did of him. To get it to him on time, even though I had done many overnighters, all-nighters in my career, that piece took me 4 days straight in the end to finish it without sleeping. 4 straight days without sleep.
How did you make it a good product?
Well,
After day 2.
I was doing fine detail stuff that I could, I could do.
Wow.
But that's a dangerous thing to do, and you shouldn't do anything like that. But there was no other way I was going to get it in on time. They were going to be presenting it to him as a gift for something that he had done, charitable or whatever. And for that occasion, the painting needed to be there, and there's no other way. There was no other way. I had to do 4 days and then collapse.
So I understand now, because, Greek and Roman, AKA classical art, is usually representational. But when we're talking here about classical art, you're referring to specific methods. And then representational art can be made deploying those classical methods,
Yes.
but it's just okay, I got
That's
it.
right. That's
okay,
right.
so let's talk about characteristics of these classical methods. In your PragerU video, which I encourage all of you listening to watch, it's I was about to say it's concise, but welcome to PragerU videos. All of them are concise.
5 minutes.
Right, but it's really, you learn so much in that short amount of time. You talk about lines and texture and color. So can you talk a little bit more about that, specifically with classical methods?
Right. Well, all those things apply to any art, whether it's classical or not.
Right.
But aesthetics is an age-old philosophy of gauging quality through certain elements in a work. And those elements, as I point out in the video, there are a number of them. There's composition, there's color balance, there's line, form, texture, movement, any number of things. And they were developed by artists themselves over centuries and abided by, because those were the ways and means of being able to create works of a very high level of execution. Almost, it's very similar to certain sports, like in the Olympics. Doing the pole vault requires certain disciplines, very specific things that if you went to a coach for doing pole vaulting, that coach could tell you all the different things that would be required to result in an athlete being able to vault over 17 feet. The same existed in painting, and there are always people out there who give me a hard time about that, saying sports and the arts are not the same thing. Well, they're not, obviously, but there are similarities this way. There were disciplines that were adhered to for centuries, disciplines that would result in a great look to a work. Those were thrown out at the end of the 19th century. We don't have to abide by that stuff. We can make our own rules and paint whatever way we want, and we don't need daddy and mommy art history to tell us how to paint. The elements that I just mentioned to you before are part of what that was all about in aesthetics. That you could, as an artist, create work within those elements. You would be very concerned about constructing a painting through proper composition. You learned what went into color balance, not just flinging colors and whatever happens, happens. And all of those other elements that I said. And yet, even if you became pretty good at that, there's no guarantee that when all those things are put together, you have a masterpiece. Because the great masters were the ones who were able to do all of that and come up with a painting that was the result of just masterful control of all of those things.
So classical art is art, obviously, as we're saying, that uses classical methods, but in a sense adhere to objective standards.
Yeah, I would use the word universal.
Beauty. Universal.
Mm-hmm. There are natural universalities which could be talked about as objective. A lot of people don't like hearing that.
Right. Yeah. I can understand how that word is not exactly apt, but when I say it, I mean, there are certain standards that you aspire to attain as an artist. Mm-hmm. And that differs from what we see now with contemporary art, where, you can walk into a museum, and there's a canvas with a one splotch of paint, and that's
right.
That's glorious.
Right.
That's beauty. So classical.
Well, it's not even
artists-
beauty. It's gotten beyond that. What the main difference, if I had to put it in as few words as possible for the average person, the main difference between the age of the masters and what is being done now in the modern world is that it's moved from the excellence of execution of a piece to ideas.
It's well said.
It's not about the piece itself.
So when was the height, if you will, of classical art? Because I'm trying to turn back in my brain and recover my what I learned in my AP art history class. I know there are all of these different periods: medieval art, Renaissance, neoclassical, Baroque, Rococo, and then Impressionism.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
it's sort of a dizzying amount of styles.
Sure.
So what years, what time periods, and what artists can be best associated with classical art?
Well, it's a little difficult to describe that. It arose and made itself known finally as early as the Greeks and Romans. That idea, the concept of the higher and the finer, that there was something you could aspire to as far as pure visual excellence, began there, and that was accepted over the subsequent centuries, but in different styles and manners.
Right.
Never losing that idea that there is an objective to go after of excellence. Well, always that idea of excellence. How can we raise the bar of visual excellence, but burnished by different cultures and different times? So it rose already by the Greeks and Romans and stayed that way until the late 19th century. If you would cherry pick an artist from any of the time periods we're talking about, let's say Fragonard during the Baroque period.
Funny you should bring that up.
Yes, and asked the good master about these things, going back to the Greeks and Romans, he'd know exactly what we're talking about.
You mean the composition and
Yes,
lines
all of
and
it,
all of it?
all
right.
of it, all of it.
By the way, I made that joke to let the audience in because we had this discussion, Robert and I, about the 5 paintings that we want to discuss today that I shouldn't say that you think that everyone should know. And I wanted to add The Swing by Fragonard. Can we put up The Swing? Sorry, I'm subjecting you to this because I love that painting, and I was sure that he was going to be fine if we just, added it into the list. And may I tell the audience your response? You kind of scoffed at it, my friend. Well, this photo kind of cuts off part of it, but I love.
This is a great painting.
I love that painting. Shame on you for scoffing at this.
I hang my head.
This is an 18th century painting,
yes, it is.
For those who don't know.
It is. Personally, the 18th century is one of my least favorite of all the 2,000 years. But we can still be friends. No, this is a great painting. I mean, he knew what he was doing. It's just the subject matter that leaves me. It's sort of like I'm going to dig myself a ditch even deeper. Can I say it?
So you can say whatever you want.
It's like the chick flick version of the painted world.
Really?
For me, I mean, it's. I'm being very silly.
Well, not that you asked, but I'm going to tell you why I like this painting so much. So this is Rococo style, which, by the way, I sound super educated in this realm. I just Googled last night that it was Rococo style and learned all about it. So that's just to say, for those of you listening who don't know anything about art, this is the right broadcast for you to listen to because we want to make everything very understandable. Anyway, this is Rococo, which from my preliminary Wikipedia understanding has many of the elements of classical methods.
Oh, of course.
But intends to make the subject matter a bit, and the painting itself a bit lighter and, for lack of a better term, more fun. And
Sure.
so what I like about this painting, first of all, look at that plush pink dress of hers and that seat that she's on, and she just looks like she's having a wonderful time, not to mention the greenery, the nature. It's very sensual. I just think it's a lovely thing to look at, and it gives it an air of casualness and fun
It's absolutely.
and carelessness.
Absolutely.
And she's kicking off that shoe of hers. And it just, to me, what I like about it is it doesn't have the severity of some of the Renaissance
the
paintings.
gravitas.
Perhaps.
Right, which is fun.
This, to me, has all of the majesty and the magnificence of classical paintings,
sure.
but without being so severe.
That's right.
Anyway, that's
It's
my...
you know what? It's at this point that I want to make my big point about that I make in the last video, and it's so important. I want
You
to
mean
say
the
it over.
PragerU video?
Yeah, in the PragerU
Got
video. I want to. It needs to be said over and over again in the new book I'm just about to finish about art. I'm considering having it to the bottom of each page. Something that people just often don't realize, that there is a distinct difference between quality and taste. They are not to be conflated. We often think that what we like something, therefore it's good, or we don't like something, therefore it's bad. It has nothing to do with each other. That's a great painting.
Thank you.
It is a great painting. I could analyze it purely from an artistic point of view and show, especially if we were standing in front of the original. It's hard to do that the way we're doing it now, or even in books. You can't get the full effect unless you're standing in front of the painting, where I can point out paint thickness. You can't see paint thickness in this. Anyway, it's a great painting. That's the quality side. It's not my cup of tea taste-wise. They're two different things. It really, in a sense, one really shouldn't be able to critique someone's taste.
Right. But what I appreciate about this discussion is we may have different tastes about this painting, but we can both agree that it's quality.
Absolutely.
And that's the distinction
Absolutely.
between, with modern art, people use your argument to kind of have this relativist way of looking at art where, if you don't like it, that doesn't mean it's not quality.
Sure.
And I think, it's a good thing to make that distinction,
Sure.
but also at the end of the day, there is quality and there's not
That's
quality.
right. And you know what? It actually is a good policy to be able to inculcate, because it works in both directions. For instance, if you understand that distinction, you also can like stuff that's junk. It's okay to have a sweet tooth for junky stuff.
As long as you recognize that it's junk.
That's right.
Right. Like, I watch
right.
The Real Housewives. I'm not saying The Real Housewives has the cinematographic, relevance or aptitude of The Godfather.
It doesn't?
I know. No, shockingly, it doesn't.
Right.
Or,
right.
So,
yes, exactly.
I can recognize it's
that's right.
junk.
And no one should have to feel bad about that.
Right.
I've got my sweet tooth artists. Pop.
What's yours? I'm never going to know who this person is, but I'll Google them afterwards.
I'd have to stop. I have a number of them. It's one of those things when somebody asks you to tell a joke and you know a lot of them, but you can't.
Right.
Can't,
all right. That's fine.
They're there. I'm admitting that they're there. In popular music, I remember in the 70s you had to go around and being real quiet about liking the Carpenters, or even ABBA.
The Carpenters?
Yeah. You don't know them? Or ABBA.
I'm gonna act like I do.
ABBA in certain
I know ABBA.
Right. In certain circumstances, in let's say in the context of the music world, you would be tarred and feathered admitting if you liked ABBA. Although ABBA actually was technically a great group, so it's kind of a bad choice. But nevertheless, just admitting that you have a sweet tooth for stuff that's not really all that sophisticated is a good way of being able to practice that understanding of the two different things.
Right. That
they're not the same thing.
So let's dive in
All right.
to number one of these five that Robert has chosen. And, I just want to pause to tell you why I'm doing this as an exercise. A lot of people my age don't know anything about classical art, myself included. And I think sometimes, in classical music for that matter, and I think sometimes we're afraid to take the first step because we think, well, we don't know anything at all about it, so we might as well not even try.
Right.
That the ship has sailed. And I have sometimes fallen prey to that attitude. But it's such a loss because there are so many marvelous pieces of art out there. And even if we can't be, comprehensive or know all of it, we should at least take a sampling.
Right.
So that's
and by the way, before we jump into this,
yes, please.
Knowing really the handful of things that you need to know in looking at a work of art, whether it's from the classic era or even now, just knowing those handful of elements as your guide, you can be able to assess the quality of a piece, no matter what the artwork is, as opposed to in modern times, if you don't do a college thesis on a particular work to understand what's going on behind that, you're not going to understand its value, so to speak. Every new fad or phase, or every individual artist is rewriting what the reasons are for the quality of their work, and you just go crazy. And how many times I've heard from people say, I go into a museum and I don't understand what I'm seeing because I have to read what's happening in these pieces, and it changes from piece to piece and era to era. If you understand the basics of aesthetics in visual art, that's all you need, and you go from time to time, from painter to painter, and it's always the same. And the only thing that's different, are the styles and whether your taste fits with that style. That's it.
Okay, so let's see how to do it with these paintings. So let's start with The Philosopher in Meditation by Rembrandt.
Is that coming up on the screen?
It is. A Dutch artist, we should all know. We should at least all be familiar with his name. And this was painted in 1632.
Yeah, this is Rembrandt, who, by the way, most historians in the last 200 years would probably say he's the greatest painter of all time. And this may not even be the best example of it. I chose these 5 paintings for various reasons. This is a small piece. It's only about 13 inches or whatever, But it's representative of Rembrandt in his use of chiaroscuro, which is the light-dark. Caravaggio did that too. High highlights against deep shadows, which is a very dramatic kind of thing. It is said that it might actually be a biblical depiction of Tobit and Hannah rather than a philosopher. But here's a perfect example of movement, of those aesthetic elements that I had described, all the different types of things. This is a beautiful example of movement in that staircase here. Will people see it if I point to this screen?
John, will people see it if he points to the screen? Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this snaking line right here is like the along with the philosophy is like a centerpiece, and I don't really like to get into what is typically art history, the art history view of looking at work in its meaning. Because if first and foremost this is a visual work of art, and we must look at the visuals and see how beautiful they are or not. The meaning behind it is secondary.
I heard you, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I heard you say this in the PragerU video, and it kind of stunned me, but also liberated me.
Yes.
Because what you just said about people going to museums and they're overwhelmed because they don't know the artist, they don't know the time period, they don't know any, and I loved when you said that, because I thought, okay, you're right. It's okay if all you get from it is a visual experience.
Well, that's what it is.
That's what it is.
Art is visual, music is oral, and they're different, but they all have ideas, they all have meanings. So what makes art stand out individually from those things, but the visual, therefore that's the most important. We don't need to know anything about what this is portraying. All we need to know is, does it work visually?
So let me, even though I just told you that statement of yours liberated me, let me push back on it a little bit. So I am not, as you know, and as I just admitted, I'm not well versed in techniques. So I can look at this and I can appreciate parts of it. But I don't see what you're seeing. I don't see what's truly masterful about this painting, because I'm just not, I'm not an expert. For instance, when you have someone who played Major League Baseball who's retired now watching a baseball game, they're watching that game at a way higher level than I, a lay person, am watching the baseball game.
Knowing details and things.
They know what's a good pitch,
course,
the form.
of course.
So how can I, as someone who isn't you, who didn't go to the
Cooper Union.
Cooper Union in New York.
Which unfortunately is a place that I didn't learn these things. But,
really?
Yeah.
How can I appreciate this beyond just a few seconds of going, wow, that looks nice?
To keep looking. Just keep absorbing yourself in it and asking yourself, let me stop for a few minutes and just look at the color. What is the color? Look at how, as opposed to the dynamics of darks and high highlights, the colors are very subtle. There's a subtle green moving into a subtle warm brown. There's a lot of warm and cool going on here. And almost a pattern of cool and warm, back to cool, and then warm again as this overall snake-like shape is happening there. We're talking purely visual, not meaning. And that's all that Rembrandt cared about. He was first and foremost an artist. Yes, he needs a subject as a vehicle to do the painting, which is, by the way, the complete opposite of what history teaches you, art history teaches you. They teach you that the painting is the vehicle to get your idea across, not for the artist. That's when art historians write because they're not artists.
It's a very, very important
Right.
point. So because in school now, whether you read a book or, in schools you're not really listening to pieces of music, but it's all about the historical commentary. So what you're suggesting here is that these artists really were doing it obviously you can't get into the heads of every single artist, but they were doing it for aesthetic excellence as opposed to a commentary.
That's right. Now, that's not to say, Rembrandt was a very religious man. So the subject, of course, meant a lot to him. But when he woke up in the morning, he was first and foremost an artist, and he was concerned about the paints in his studio, to be able to make sure that they were mixed properly and all those kinds of things. Someone who's not truly an artist is not going to care about those things. So we should care also first and foremost. And that's why I love the word liberated, because you don't need to know what's going on here as far as the narrative. But what I say is knowing the narrative afterwards only enhances the experience.
Right. So tell me the narrative. Maybe... Is there more that you'd like to say before the narrative?
Well, yeah. I just, with this painting, I love two things. I love that it's a very kind of almost modern conceit to be that bold, to have that kind of shape taking over a painting done in the 1650s. To do something like that. They usually wouldn't do something that kind of kooky in a way. Now, it's kind of a fun thing that Rembrandt did in that. But the other thing,
it is fun.
The other thing is this. It's almost ethereal light coming from here. It's not just white paint. It's the masterful blend of knowing what to put around it and where to put it in the painting that gives it this almost like inner glow.
And even that fire in the bottom right. You just, when you just said, look at that ethereal light, I just had this moment where I went, oh my gosh, it's a painting.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it sounds a bit kooky to say, but I think sometimes when we're looking at something like this, we forget that it's a painting because it looks so real.
Right.
And that's when you realize how magnificent it is, when you look at that and you go, wait a minute, you're right.
Right.
That's not real. I'm not looking at an actual window with real light. That's a painting.
And let me tell you something, as an artist, if you were to see this in real life, and this is a poor reproduction. It's just going to be the case on the internet, unless you get sometimes you get museums that will do these incredibly high res photographs of them, and you can sort of zoom in and see it. But if you were to see this in real life, that is not a single color plastered on there like painting a wall.
Really?
There are all these variations in there. You're looking at the brush strokes and the choice of refined differences of color as he's laying it in there. That right there, that's as I say in the video, that's the essence of quality in art. That's what it's all about, not the profound story, the backstory or whatever. And you could, for me as an artist, I could stand there for 10 or 15 minutes just looking at the light work that he painted in there. You can even see it in this bad reproduction, that there's a little bit of mottling that goes on, showing you that it's not a single color that was mixed on the palette and then just filled into that rectangle. There's a lot going on in there, and that's representative of everything else going on in the painting.
So what is going on?
In the end, you put all that together and you end up with a mood. It creates a mood. There's an air about it. We'll talk about this if we get to the Vermeer. Vermeer was brilliant with this.
We will. It's number 2.
It creates a sense of place that you can almost hear the room. In some paintings, especially with Vermeer, I can hear them breathing. There's a life. There's a life to what's going on in here. I can feel the air and the sounds, and not just what we're seeing visually there, but it's visually very profound. Not the story, just visually. This elderly man in a very thoughtful pose with hands crossed, as the woman is stoking the fire, and it just the mastery of the method is able to create that whole mood. So
the method, just to have some specifics here, you mentioned the color, and specifically the light tones and the dark tones, the shadowing, the light coming from that window. You mentioned the curve of the staircase. What else here is important to note about the superiority in methods?
He's also playing with shapes. It's interesting. You have these repetitive shapes. This and this.
Well, that's true.
And this.
That's very
and
true.
That's the top of the circle. And so you have circular through circular triangular shapes that are sort of embraced by this staircase again, which is really the star of the painting, not the philosopher,
right.
In between the two characters. So there's so many things going on at the same time that you can just stand back and enjoy. That repetitive shape thing that is, I always love this. I remember this painting from when I was a kid, and I would see this and this and this and this table here going through that.
You see things in it that I don't. And it makes me feel stupid.
No. You know what? I'm not able to see those because I'm a professional artist.
Right.
I'm able to see those because I learned that's what to look for.
Yeah.
Most people don't look for that when they're looking at paintings. They've been taught to look for the outside meaning of it all.
Right.
What's the storyline?
It's true.
It's not important what the story. I mean, it ultimately it can be to enhance, but not essentially.
So
look at this green here also is just.
It is.
This is sort of like marries with this green and green.
This isn't so much form as it is content, but what I like about this painting and what I like about the swing, not just to bring everything back to Fragonard, is that you discover things. You kind of look over there and you go, what is that? Are those pots and pans? Or is it, what is she doing? What's that on the ground? Is it a bouquet of flowers? Is it twigs for the fire? It's a fun discovery thing.
And you do see it all much clearer if you saw the original piece.
Yeah, I bet. For the sake of time, I'm sorry to do this with these paintings.
Okay,
but
you want to go faster?
Okay. Sean's telling me we have 35 minutes left, just so we can do each of them justice. Let's move on to Woman Holding a Balance by Johannes Vermeer.
Yes.
You said, I don't know if we're going to get to Vermeer. Here we are, my friend.
Well, I gave you this list in chronological order, so.
Oh, okay. Yes. Another Dutch painter.
Yes.
This was in 1662.
And Vermeer is my favorite painter, and I will make the claim that he was the greatest painter ever, and I'm not alone in that. There is a cadre of people in the arts who believe it also. There are only 35 known Vermeers. Only 35 known Vermeers, and 28 of them are being brought together starting next month, I think, at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam.
Is that a low number for a classical artist?
Yeah.
What's the average number of paintings
Rembrandt painted over 600 paintings, just paintings alone. That's not drawings, etchings, all that. Paintings, over 600.
What about Da Vinci?
Da Vinci is a fairly low number also, but that's so far back that a lot of his material could possibly have been lost since then.
Okay.
A lot of drawings, But his painting methods, which it was that same early painting method that I was talking about that I tried to learn myself, is laborious, and it just takes a long time. The Last Supper, that's several years to make that. It's just a very long time. But we know very little about Vermeer, which is also interesting. We won't get into it today, but one of the reasons, for instance, that Van Gogh became popular long after he died was because his personal letters were made public. His work was not enjoyed. Nobody liked his work. It looked unfinished. It looked juvenile. His letters came out with this horrible story of his life and the tragedies and everything, and it added gravitas to the paintings that didn't really deserve that, because it's all about the paint. Here with Vermeer, we don't know anything about him, very little. We know that he was an art dealer. A lot of artists in those days also were dealers to make a living, where they would also sell paintings and whatnot. We know very little about him. There are no drawings. There are no preparatory pieces for his paintings. When they do x-rays, there's no drawings underneath. It's almost like they were magically painted onto the canvas somehow. And with Vermeer, more than any other painting, there is a mystical, magical, spiritual thing that happens that's beyond, it's like synergy, the sum of the parts. It's greater than the sum of its parts. You put it all together and something else is happening there, and I can't describe that. But he was all about absolute perfection in balance in every way. Nothing is out of place. There's a line in Amadeus where, do you know the film? Where Salieri says he's looking at one of Mozart's pieces and he says, I'm looking at this and it's almost like perfection of heaven. Displace one note and it falls apart. This is a visual version of that.
Great quote.
His work, Vermeer's work. Everything is perfectly aligned. The color balance is just supreme. There's nothing that you go to it and you say, it's a little uncomfortable. Even the great masters will have areas like that. But everything just works perfectly, and the application of paint itself, when you see the original, is just stunning to behold. Every drop of paint is exactly where it should be. There's no ad-libbing, so to speak. This is not jazz painting.
Right.
This is classical music painting. This is Bach.
It's amazing, looking at those necklaces.
Yeah.
Or the, I'm assuming that's a coat or a shawl, a blanket,
exactly,
something.
Exactly.
Just the way that it's so realistic, the way that it folds and layers, and again, as seemingly obvious as it may sound, it's amazing to think that this is on a flat surface. This is the painting. You can't paint in or under the painting.
Also with economy, he's doing things, and sometimes in a very simple way, like just almost like a single stroke to show the highlights on the fingers, without getting into refined detail that a lot of artists will, and yet it reads perfectly. And he does that all through the painting, everywhere. There's not like a finickiness to getting detail and everything, and yet you get the sense of the detail in the pearls and whatnot.
It's very delicate, and it's kissed by affluence, this painting, or the woman or the objects, but without being gaudy.
Right.
And it gives an impression of simple elegance.
Right.
So I'm sorry to, in each of these paintings, to go right to the historical context, but I'm trying to not do that as much, actually, because of what we just talked about, where it's primarily a visual piece. But what is going on here? Who is this person?
All right, I can talk about that kind of thing. I usually don't, because there are more than enough history books that will.
Right.
We see a woman who, by the way, is obviously pregnant. But it's a second...
Not obvious to me.
Well, I shouldn't have said obvious, because it is a second read. You don't realize it at first.
Oh, wow, you're right.
She's also holding a balance.
Right.
She's weighing things, interestingly, against a painting on the wall of the Last Judgment. So, what's going on. It's like a mystery. That's fun stuff for the art history classes, you know. And it's not, I'm not poo-pooing
But you can
it.
analyze it to death.
You can. But there is that if you want it. For me, I try to see things through the eyes of Vermeer. What was he interested in? And I look at things like, as you're growing up and you're artistically inclined, you're always cataloging things visually for future reference and everything. And I remember as a kid looking up at a window and seeing how oddly it would cast a light in a strange spot there, but then disappear and it's not there anymore. When I see that, I know Vermeer. He was looking at that same kind of thing himself, how things happen in real life visually with light and shadow and everything.
What do you think is the best way to look at a painting through the eyes of the artist?
I do.
Through the, just sort of the techniques and the methods, or through the story that's being told?
No, as much as you can.
I know all of it. But
right, as much as you can through the eyes of the artist, not the historian. What was the artist thinking or trying to accomplish as he's laying paint down on that board?
Right.
You know?
I hate to rush you.
Go ahead.
But
go
no,
ahead.
I really want to get to these Songs of the Angels.
Ah, Bouguereau.
Bouguereau. I'm glad you said it, so I didn't have to.
William Alphonse Adolphe Bouguereau.
Frenchman.
Yes.
1881.
Probably. That is cropped. Is there any way to show that whole thing? No, you
This
don't
is what
have
they
it.
have,
You don't have.
yeah.
Too bad. Bouguereau was probably he's most definitely the greatest painter of the 19th century, and is probably up in the top 5 or 10 of all time. But he is also, at the same time, laughed at by the art establishment.
Why?
He was considered his work was the best example of bourgeois sentimentality, and cast off. He was the king of painting at the time the Impressionists came around. So I say almost overnight. It did take about 30 years for the progress to happen for the moderns.
Can you just quickly explain for the benefit of the audience what Impressionism was?
Impressionism
changed things.
was a
Or is, I should say, is.
Yeah, well, it is. It was a protest against the long-held Academy standards of excellence.
Right.
They didn't want to have to abide by those tough disciplines, and wanted to do things quickly and freely.
So that's where we see the splotching, the kind of it's
Well,
Van Gogh. It's Starry Night. It's
that's post. It's Monet. I mean, it's Monet,
Monet.
and the water lilies and everything. It's the and there's nothing wrong with that. It's the choice to paint quickly and impressionably in the moment,
as opposed to having it look quite realistic.
Well, realism. That's a funny thing, because realism, again, is only a stylistic choice. You
Right.
could still apply all the technique that Bouguereau was doing to a style that doesn't necessarily look photographic.
Okay.
That's all that is. But anyway, so the Impressionists were rebelling against having to abide by these long-held standards. They wished that they could get into the yearly Salon exhibit that thousands of people would go to and stand in awe of the new piece by Bouguereau or any of the other painters at the time. So they started their own exhibits that people would go to and laugh at what they were doing. But over time, about 30 years worth, there was so much PR that was pumped into the public by people who were supporting this new movement, basically because they wanted to be able to sell the work at higher prices. The Impressionists could do a painting in 3 hours. This probably took about 3 months. So you could do that. And as that is happening, not only are they rising in popularity into the early part of the 20th century, but the great last masters are being pushed into the dustbin of history.
So he
totally
was
forgotten.
one of the last ones.
He's one of the last, but he was the greatest one. Monet himself and Van Gogh, when asked, who do you think the greatest painter of the 19th century was, they both said him. They acknowledge it.
High praise.
They acknowledge it. And Van Gogh would say in his letters, I know I'll never be able to draw like Bouguereau. I only wish I could.
So unlike Vermeer, he did do the outlines.
Oh, he
before.
had the whole method down. The models, drawing from the models, making studies until he got it all right.
Right.
Working constantly to get everything right, then transferring it to this huge canvas and then painting it, in oils. And he's probably the greatest painter of human skin that existed in history.
Why?
You won't see it in this. This is where it gets kind of technical, but I show this in my book. You can actually see how that all works. He has an ability to have the finest gradations of color and light across an area of skin than any other painter. It's not just mixing up what we would consider a flesh color, light and dark, and put it on there. It's incredible variations, like razor thin, different variations of color, which means the more you have of that going on, the more you have to balance it so that it doesn't get weird looking. And does that make sense, my explanation?
It does. So why did you choose this painting? And again, if I'm walking into a museum and I know nothing about the time period, nothing about the artist, I mean, it's sort of obvious what the subject matter is, but when I'm looking at this, what forms and methods pop out to you as superior?
Well, for me, it's a combination of deep respect and faith and reverence, but also a musicality. There's a wonderful sense of flow. You get a sense that those wings of the angels are moving with the music that's being played for the baby Jesus. There's a musicality. There's so much going on in this painting that I could talk about. These beautiful X shapes, where you have this thing going on here that focuses the center of it right on the music, and then you have this here with all of this here coming right to the center on the Jesus child himself. There are all these little methods. That's a compositional thing. This is well thought out. It's not an accident when somebody like Bouguereau is designing the composition for the piece.
So I know it's hard to speak about this comprehensively, but with shapes, so that first Rembrandt painting that we saw, the Philosopher in Meditation, you pointed out the arc shapes.
Right. Same thing here. You get that. You get those shapes that are repeated. Is
it about consistency in shapes in the painting? Mm-mm. Or is it about, yes, there's consistency with the lines here, but you're saying the lines sort of direct it to Christ.
Right.
So I just want to better understand the way that shapes are used.
Sure.
And of course it's dependent on the painting.
Shapes can be used just as a repetitive thing through a painting, in the sense that you would create a pattern in a quilt or something that's pleasant to the eye.
Right.
This is more meaningful because the shapes here are guiding your eye movement and helping you subconsciously focus on certain areas. And you don't realize why you are, but it's the shapes that are helping your eyes do that. In composition, for instance, there's also choices that, and we're not seeing the whole thing here. There are choices that are made that help guide your eye into the painting to begin with, go around in a journey, and then out of the painting. And
really?
Oh yeah.
Can you try? I know it's hard without, but
not so much in this. You do where the bottom of this thing is really beautiful, because you do tend to do this and up into the angels. Not as much in this painting as in other ones that I could show. That would be an example of that specific thing I'm talking about. Get the book when it comes out. You'll see examples of it.
I certainly will.
I actually have lines on the painting showing you where the eye movement is.
I think this is fascinating.
Yeah.
So, but I mean.
And his color is just, and the other reason I chose this is because we are in Los Angeles right now. This can be seen here. This is at Forest Lawn, Glendale, of all places in the world.
Of all places, in our backyard.
They have a chapel, yes, right here in Glendale. They have a chapel at the top of the hill in one of the hilly areas of the Forest Lawn. And in that chapel is this painting high above, I think it's like a fireplace.
Not the original.
The original is there.
Holy moly.
You can see this.
I'm good. I may drive after work to see this. I'm not kidding.
I exaggerate a little. It's steps away from where he is. So how do you like that? Didn't we just bring this whole interview into?
Yeah, we really did.
Okay. There's one other phenomenal
Tell
Bouguereau.
the audience what? Who Errol Flynn is?
Really?
He's not referring to Errol Flynn.
Yeah, I am. I am. Errol Flynn lies at rest a few steps from this.
Okay. He was referring to Errol Flynn. My apologies. I thought you were referring to the artist, and I was like, "Why is the artist buried in Glendale?"
No.
That makes
The
no
artist is buried in.
Thank you, Sean.
He is in La Rochelle,
For educating
France.
me.
If you want to
Yeah,
go to La Rochelle.
that would make more sense than
Right.
Forest Lawn in Glendale.
But
Anyway,
if you go there and are stunned as you will be by that painting, you can just from there head on over to the Getty Museum to see his woman defending herself from arrows. Wow, what a piece!
I'm going to the Getty soon, so I will make sure to look
I
out
have
for it.
stood in front of that with several like private groups of young art students pointing out things in there, and I could go on forever with a piece like that. If you look it up, I'm gonna write it down on your own time. Woman defending herself from arrows.
I will. Storm in the Rocky Mountains next.
Yes. There's a lot of interesting things about this that in some ways don't have anything to do with the painting. Albert Bierstadt was a German who came to the United States in the late 1900s.
Wow.
During the move west, all the pioneers going west, finding, learning about the vastness of the American West. And he would go out too. And what he would do is he would do these paintings that in these days, a very important thing about art in these days, art was for the public. They would go to exhibits like you would go to movies now. They pay money. There's going to be a new painting by Albert Bierstadt. We have to go and see it. And they would stand in awe of these things, of a Bouguereau even, And he would have a new painting unveiled in New York City, and crowds would come to see it. This thing is about 12 feet long. I mean, it's a giant piece to convey the vastness of the scene.
How would they, I mean, would they? I presume they would stand on stools and
Oh
and
yeah,
paint.
yeah.
But
On
your
ladders.
arm must get quite
No.
tired
They'd
fast.
be on ladders, and he'd be on ladders and on scaffolds and things like that to do it. But what he would do is he would do these amazing, overwhelming landscape paintings that the people who say, well, now you can have photographs do that. No, you can't. First of all, if you're looking properly at a painting for what it's truly worth, you're going to see brushwork. You're going to see the results of the human hand. A photograph doesn't do that. A photograph only captures what's in front of the lens. It can't control that. The other thing is, these places don't really exist. In a sense, it's the true Impressionism in a way. He got an impression when he was out there making little drawings, goes back to his studio in the East, and then constructs a semi-fantasy version of what he would see. And the other thing that people loved about him to see these paintings is not just this new great painting, but it was a sense of the West that they would never be able to see. The average New Yorker in 1870 is not going to be able to go out to Arizona and see what it is.
It's a great point that we all forget, that the way that people could see things before photographs was paintings.
And most of everything I've just been talking about is not what we have been talking about, which is not the painting itself. These are those side things that sort of add interest. It's not important in the end, all these things I told you. Is it a good painting or not? And it's a terrific painting. I mean, the sense of light and shadow in this is great. The drama of that storm cloud.
And then peeking through it, you see how far back this
There's a lake
landscape
there.
goes.
There's a lake
Yes.
there, and it's just awe-inspiring. And to top it all off, and I used to show my graduate classes this, what's really interesting is his choice of large and small, right down to, people don't even notice these little people on the horses here. When you finally see that they're humans and horses, now you get a true idea of the proportion of everything else that you're looking at. It was already huge and overwhelming. Now you really know how huge and overwhelming, because there are people there, So we could talk forever about this one too. Bierstadt was you had mentioned Thomas Cole.
Yes.
You had, right?
Another one that he goes,
No, Thomas Cole is very good. Thomas Cole was at the very beginning of what's called the Hudson River School.
yes.
Right?
And I read on your website that someone compared your style and your work to the Hudson River School.
Which was very nice. I did a book of landscapes, and that's probably why they said that. There's a Thomas Cole.
That's a Thomas Cole. I love
Thomas
him.
Cole is a holdover from the styles of the 18th century, which I'm not a fan of. I mean, that's the Fragonard thing and everything. He was at the very beginning of that. Bierstadt and Thomas Moran were the height of the Hudson River School group of artists doing these phenomenal landscapes. And so that's the Beatles and Rolling Stones of the landscape artists of the 19th century, and they were just tremendous. Cole is good. He's a little more fantastical.
True.
You know, and again,
I
that's
saw
a
him
taste
during
thing.
COVID. I saw him at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. during COVID when they were allowing, like 5 visitors. So I think I really needed to see something like this. But I agree with you that it's sort of perhaps at times overkill. I mean, it's magical.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful
magical.
panel. It's just not my thing, especially knowing what was to come. And by the way, the later painters of that school, of that movement, they loved Cole. They looked up to him as the sort of like the godfather of this new movement.
Right. Well, just going back quickly to The Storm in the Rocky Mountains, one of the things that I like about this painting is I can't tell if I'm scared by it, if it's a little harrowing.
I think you should be.
Creepy. But
No,
it's
not creepy. Oh, creepy? That kind of scare?
No, creepy is not the right word. Well, there does seem to be maybe a supernatural element at play. Ominous is a better word.
Let me.
But then it's also, you see the sun peeking through and you see those beautiful mountains, and then down there it's like, are they having fun? Are they running down? Are they fighting?
Right. Look at the highest peak.
Right.
Right. If I can offer a possibility of what you're feeling, whenever I look at this thing, I feel vulnerable because you know what Mother Earth can do in that. And imagine a slight shaking going on, and you're in this situation here.
Yes.
Or even he's presaging what could happen with this gigantic storm coming in. By the way, this was his largest painting that he ever did, and it's in Brooklyn. You know?
Finally, let's go to Saying Grace by Norman Rockwell, our first American artist on this list.
Yeah.
This was in 1951.
Yep. Oh no. It is so heavily cropped. That's it?
It says it's the best picture he could get
all
to.
All right, okay. Well...
Sean. No, I'm kidding.
Rockwell,
it's hard to scale these.
Rockwell is also the only
guy.
one amongst all of these that was purely an illustrator. He was not an easel artist. He was not a museum artist. He was an illustrator. But, again, looking at things through the eyes of the artist himself, he was a master of paint. What he could do with paint was the equal of great painters before him. It just so happened that he applied that talent to illustration subjects. And unfortunately for him, sometimes bordering on corny subject matter. And yet, no matter how corny, the painting itself was always, in common parlance, bang up. It was just great.
So can you describe what makes this painting so superior?
This, in some ways, has some of the similarities of what I was talking about with the Vermeer, where it comes from that lifelong, constant observation of things that happen in reality with light. And I love how he does that with these he has chosen to pose the people against this backdrop, right, which is like rim lighting in movie language. And you have rim lighting around everything rather than everything being full light. And his ability to capture those particular details of how light works in a situation like this and apply it in a painterly way is just, if you're trying to do that kind of thing as a painter, you realize how it's not easy. You have to be very prepared in putting something like this together. This is not an impressionist piece. This is not sitting there and just doing quickly what you see there. It is very careful observation in your life, and having that backlog of how things work and say, oh yeah, I remember that time I was sitting in the station and I could see that rim light against the boys. I'm going to set him up that way. And I'm going to paint it that way. You know, there are artists who would like to set it up that way and can't paint it as successfully. He knew his tools so well. And also in drawings, I mean, he was fantastic with a pencil. The storyline in this is great too. I mean, it's got great, you know, the reverence in this. They're sitting in a diner at a train station, and you see the whole room, and everybody's just looking at this old woman and her son or grandson praying before their meal, and it's like they haven't seen that before publicly, and they're curious, and everybody is turned around in their table and looking at it. It's a very sweet piece and very touching.
So those two at the table with them are not part of their party.
No. In those days, in a crowded restaurant, you sit where you can sit, and so these are strangers. You know, and they've stopped in the middle of, they're looking at their racing forms or something to see these two people saying grace before the meal, and nobody does that.
And so those two are looking at
Yes.
It looks to me like the guy with the cigarette in his mouth is looking beyond them.
No, he's looking at them. Everybody around it in the piece, you see the whole room, and everybody in the piece is turned around and looked at, what are these two doing? This is really odd in the train station.
That is so interesting what you say about people sharing a table. I don't think in my life
we do
I've
that
ever seen that.
I live in Germany. We do that in Europe. That happens often in restaurants. If you don't have seats, they'll ask you to sit at your table.
Sometimes at a really casual restaurant, they'll have a big long table in the
Yes.
center, like Le Pen that I was at this morning. You know, and you can pull up a chair, but that's.
Right.
Square table, 4 people. I've never seen that in my life.
Someone in 1951 would have understood this immediately. They never would have even questioned that. It's a crowded little diner. People are walking in. This guy's coming in the door. He's still got his jacket on. He's about to take it off, and he's looking at it too. It's saying that this is so unusual in this context. By 1951, it's unusual that you would see this, and they're serious. They're dead serious in their reverence that they need to say their prayer before their meal.
You can see that the grandmother is serious, and you know the boy is serious, even though you can't see his face because of the way that his head is bowed down.
Right. Here's an artistic thing. This is, as an artist, I will notice this. I would venture to say that most young artists would have posed the boy so the head is straight down forward in front of him. What does Rockwell do? He tilts it a little. That's a beautiful.
You mean
little,
towards his grandmother?
Yes, you see.
Yeah,
why isn't his
very
head
nice
just tilted
observation.
down straight? His head is that way, so that they're praying together.
There's a love, a connection, a deference.
Right, but
yes.
it's also a purely visual thing too. Getting back to art as being the visual, because it takes it away from being static. If his body and head were straight up and down, even with the chair, there would be a dead spot here.
Right.
But now we have this, and it moves through.
Not to mention that it would change the mood.
Sure it
because,
would.
You know, you see those boys in
Sure it would.
and their heads are just down, and they look
Right.
so
Right.
resigned to their act.
Yes, and in this way, you get a sense of him a little more because you see the side of his face that he's not opposing this.
Right.
If it was just the back of his head, all right, I'm doing this for Grandma. You know?
And it looks like he's sitting patiently.
Yeah.
You know, he's
Yeah.
not.
He's perfectly as fine with this as Grandma is.
You know,
And it's my favorite Rockwell. Rockwell was just so looked down upon in art schools when I was going to school. You had to be very secretive about it. He's gained in respectability since then, but I was always a huge fan of his, mostly again because I recognized the mastery of his painterly abilities. But he did. This is a Saturday Evening Post cover. He did 350 covers for the Saturday Evening Post, which was a magazine that came out weekly. All of America would get it. It was a large-sized magazine, and probably once a month, one of the covers was by Rockwell, and everybody looked forward to his cover. And this is my favorite Rockwell painting of all time, and there are many to choose from. He was the stenographer of America. He showed America visually what it was from the 20s to the early 70s.
You know, I wrote down 3 adjectives just a few minutes ago that I think, or qualities that you have to possess as someone who is looking at a painting. You have to be patient.
Yes.
Which I am not particularly good at when I'm going, okay, how is this going to move me? What's good about this? What's the time period, et cetera? But what you said a few minutes ago, keep looking. There's patience.
Can I stop you right there and
Sure,
add to you?
stop me.
In my current video, PragerU video, right, I mentioned that much of modern art is like a joke that once you hear the punchline, it's over.
Yes, I
you
love
don't go back to it in year after year and absorb yourself in seeing more and more of from the painting. No, I get it. Yeah, that's clever. I know what they're trying to say. It's a little political statement. Cool. Banksy, I get it. He's showing some political that's good. Okay, move on.
I loved when you said that, and I also loved when you said, I don't know if it was in the modern, why the modern art is so bad video or why classical art is so good video, but you said, I think it was the latter. You said, with classical art, you know the joke isn't on you.
That's right. You can never be made a fool.
And I remember being really young, and I was on a school field trip, and we went to some museum in downtown LA, and it was a modern art exhibit, and adults were standing in front of this blank canvas, and I mentioned it at the start of the show, with this, just one brush of paint on it and then maybe a few dribbles of paint. There were just these people standing and, scratching their chins, and they're looking. And I remember, as like an 8-year-old thinking, am I just stupid? Like, is there something really profound in this that I'm not seeing? And then it hit me, wait a minute. We talk so much about art being a political, social, societal commentary. Maybe the artist designed this knowing that it was crap.
We have no way of knowing.
To lampoon and humiliate the people watching, as a display, like, this is how stupid and sheep-like. So anyway, that was my little realization today, but I loved when you said that in that video. Number one is patience. Number two is you have to be perceptive. When you were talking about the things that you notice in daily life with the way that light plays. When you highlighted that for me, I understood, and I went, oh yeah, that's true. That is how light works. But I don't think that I or a lot of people my age would see that as fast as you would, because, and this is my little off-the-cuff hypothesis, we spend so much time on our phones. We're not looking up and paying attention at real life in the natural world the way that artists were during that time.
But don't criticize yourself too much, or the younger generation too much, because it was already that way. The art history did that to us before it got as bad as the cell phones. Art history untaught us to look at art. They taught us to look at meanings behind the art. So it was already a handicap.
And also, even with new technologies like driving a car or going on an air, just daily things, you're not going to be paying as much attention to the natural world. I don't necessarily mean it as a knock. I mean, in some ways I do, on the observer, but just in our advanced world, we don't have to look around and pay attention and find meaning.
No, you don't.
In the world as much as these people
We do
did.
live in a faster world, which works against your first point that you established about the patience.
Oh, totally.
You can't be patient in the kind of world we live in.
And then the third thing, and it sort of dovetails with patience, is you have to be persistent. You can't just give up on the painting. I don't get it. I don't see what's so marvelous about this. I think you have to work to find,
Well, you know what, though?
kind of scour the painting.
I'm not so sure on that one. I think if you've got the first two down, you shouldn't. A subtext to what I've been talking about all this time is that you shouldn't have to work at it.
Right. That's true.
You know, the average person in 19th century Paris who was going to see that year's Salon exhibit, usually in August, they just understood this stuff by nature. They stood in front of these paintings and were in total awe for all of the reasons the artist was trying to accomplish. There was no, gee, I'm going to have to come back because I'm not quite sure I understand this. No, We have learned to understand because we think we have to, in a sense. Boy, I'm just really getting into word salad here. But
no, you're right. And you even see the fact that I'm talking about persist. It shows my mind naturally goes back to work
That's right.
to get
Work.
this.
A painting comes up on the wall here, and immediately you're starting to think, okay, what don't I understand?
Yes.
What do I need to be told to unlock the key that only the elites know? Because that's what it is in the art world now. There's an elitism, almost like religious cults, where we have the secret message. And if you were part of us, you would have that secret message to unlock and understand the universe. But you, in your overcoat that's too long, standing in the museum, you don't understand it, so tough.
I didn't even plan it this way, but tomorrow on this show, I'm interviewing John Agresto, who's the author of a book called The Death of Learning. And one of the things that he talks about in his marvelous book is how we have explained texts to death. Where, and I have the Scarlet Letter here on my set. It's the only visible book here because I love it so much. But I remember when I was learning the Scarlet Letter in high school, we would just open a passage and go, this is a simile, this is a metaphor, this is alliteration, this is da-da-da, and you explain the thing to death. And Agresto says the beauty of liberal arts, the beauty of literature, isn't being able to identify, it's soaking in the story and the experience.
As a whole. Soaking in the experience of that first Rembrandt painting as a visual.
Yes.
And it's funny because I'm thinking back now, all the questions you were asking were coming from that experience that you had learning about art in the way you did.
I know, you're right.
And you don't have to.
I feel like there's something wrong, though, if I'm not doing it that way.
I know. You've been taught that.
Right.
And you're not. Just enjoy for what the artist, him or herself, meant from day one. They don't give a damn about those other things. That's for art historians who are not artists. What else, as I say in my book, what else are they going to say? That's all they have to go by is sociology and political connections. How does this matter in its time?
Right.
Remember, art is really just a reflection of its times. No, it is not. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. There are more than enough. There were the great flower painters of the 17th century. Van Huysum, you can see Van Huysum at the Getty. What does that have to do with the time period,
It's a good note to end on.
Flowers?
Yes. No, being liberated, just enjoying it.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my
We didn't
pleasure.
even get to the hottie, Errol Flynn, but I
next
guess
time.
you'll just have to come back on the show.
Once you read it, you might want to have me back. But you don't have to read it. You don't have to
we
read
have
it.
a lot of other paintings I would love to talk to you about on the show. Thank you for joining us. And
My
thank
pleasure.
you all, as always, for joining us. And I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.